All right, I can't resist. This is actually part two. And I'll have to go back and do part one.
Right now, in real time, that will materially cool the economy. Head over to it. So how substantial is this, and what does history tell us to expect when this happens?
Well, it is very interesting. In fact, if you look at the 12-month, 24-month, and 36-month rate of growth in bank credit, which would be loans and investments in the bank, they're all negative. What's very significant is that money or deposits lead bank credit. When the Fed throttles back on the money supply, it takes a long time before the banks choke off the lending cycle. And so, in fact, you can see it on our charts. The 12-month change in inflation-adjusted bank credit is the lagging indicator. It doesn't become negative until you're already in the recession. In fact, there are cases where bank credit doesn't even decline in a mild recession, or it doesn't decline until the end of the recession. So the economy is still moving forward. We're not in recession. Labor markets are still gaining. But what is unusual is that the bank credit, a lagging indicator, is negative in real terms for the last 12, 24, and 36 months. That's very unusual, extremely unusual. So you have a slowdown in money and bank deposits, you have a contraction in bank credit, and you also have a high real policy rate as well.
So to hear you say it that way, I sort of think of it as like a perfect storm experience. You know, like, do we have the vast majority of them still to come? Are we midway through the game? What do you think?
I'm not exactly sure what you're asking me, Adam. Could you just restate the question again?
Yeah, I'm sorry. So the lag effect of policy decisions like
On the
interest rate is best. Yeah,
we're very late in the game, but so this is the seventh quarter since the financial the maximum point of financial looseness. The longest lags are 9 months, 9 quarters. So we're very late in the game, but the lags could still persist for another 6 months or so.
okay, and let me just ask it again, just to make sure I capture what I'm trying to say here, which is
There's a very material decline since last September. There's been material impact on gross domestic income, but GDP is continuing to rise. So I would say that the economy has experienced. I would say they're beginning to feel the pressure, but it's not. We're not close to the middle innings by any chance.
okay, and that's sort of where I'm going into this video is being watched by kind of regular people, and I'm trying to help them sort of understand what to expect in their own lived experiences. And if we feel that there is potentially substantial layoffs ahead, a real recession ahead, maybe something that pulls today's highly richly valued markets down as a result, you know, that's going to be a lot more pain than for sure they've felt so far this year. You know, last year wasn't a cakewalk for them, but this year, you know, a lot of people are saying, phew, I think we dodged a bullet. I think from what I hear you saying is no, you haven't.
I would say that we have not dodged a bullet, and I think that you can always get better luck. There can be fortuitous circumstances. The fact that we've had poor weather and the energy markets have righted themselves, this is really not a positive for economic activity. It's going to boost the inflation rate a little bit temporarily, but more importantly, it's going to disrupt household budgets at a time when household budgets are already in disarray.
Right. Okay. So, and I'm not trying to force words in your mouth, but it sounds like if I could kind of put some words in your mouth to the average consumer, now might be a good time to buckle up.
I think that is extremely sound advice. I think that there are a lot of potential risks in the economic outlook here, and it's a time for caution and carefulness.
Okay. Let's conclude here by.
Let me just make one little point.
Sure.
According to the numbers that I recently saw, the average credit card loan rate is now over 20%.
It's the highest it's ever been. You're right.
Yes, it's the highest.
Criminal.
Now, what I've said is that the household sector is either completely unaware of the matter of compound interest, or else they are in dire straits. Because when you pay a 20% interest rate for a prolonged period of time, if you can go 7 or 8 years, you're gonna pay more in interest than what you initially borrowed. I mean, this is you're really compounding your problems to be borrowing heavily at 20%. I mean, this is not a smart thing to do. And it's a time when the consumer need to be pulling back. And I believe that is happening between the banks saying that the loan loss provisions on automobile loans and other types are rising. But I think that consumers need to get their financial house in order to protect themselves from the potential economic vulnerabilities, which I believe lie ahead.
All right, and this is why I was kind of digging in with these questions, Lacy, here, which is before we turn the video on here, you and I were commenting on the interview I just did with Ben.
Stations. I wrote a book in 1987 called Time to Be Rich, published by Macmillan. I don't know if it made anybody else rich, but it helped me out a little bit. And what I basically talked about is the 5 stages of the business cycle. And people, and this is the way I would describe it. An expansion has 3 phases: revival, acceleration, and maturation. Revival is when you come out of a recession. Acceleration is the nice part of the middle part of the curve, when the inflation rate is still coming down a little bit or stabilizing, but the real economic indicators are accelerating.
That's the boom everybody loves. Yep.
That's what we all live for. And then there's maturation, and inflation starts accelerating, and the real growth rate turns sideways. The recession has 2 phases. The first is called ease off, in which the economy begins to decline, but it's not really clear that it's declining until long after the fact. And in fact, the most concrete that I can say about maturation and ease off is that the statistics look almost identical. The lagging indicators remain the strongest component in both maturation and ease off. The leading indicators are deteriorating, and the coincident indicators are mixed. So what do we have now? Well, you have some of the components of the economy declining, like industrial production, gross domestic income, the Chicago Fed's National Activity Index, and so forth. But the overall economy is continuing to grow. But the second phase of the recession is called plunge. I call it plunge. And the economy just breaks, and you have a waterfall. And so we often go through a process in which people will say the recession is not coming, that this time is different, because the initial impact of the inflation and the monetary response don't seem to congeal. but ultimately they do. So
Okay.
plunge comes after ease off, and that's what we haven't seen yet.
Okay, and it feels like we're right on that cusp right
I
now.
think we're moving there. And this upturn in the commodity prices and the cost of basic necessities, which we may see in June, in July, and maybe perhaps in August, if this commodity surge does not continue, if it continues, then that will add to the problems. It does not solve the problems.
Okay, and I wanted to score this because, if we're looking at headlines, right, we're seeing a lot of headlines of, hey, the most expected recession in the world never happened, and maybe we dodged that bullet. And using just sort of Wealthion as a data set, I would say in the past couple of weeks, month or so, we've seen a surge in comments of people saying, hey, all these people that were on your channel that were kind of, advising caution of what lay ahead, later this year, those guys are all wrong, right? You guys have missed the mark. We're in this great new rally, and you guys have just been way too bearish. And look, I can't ignore what the markets have done. The markets have had a pretty vicious start to the year so far, first half of the year. But it does not seem like, from a macro standpoint, that we are out of the woods. And what you're providing here is, both the academic economic explanation for what to expect, but also just your understanding of history, where you've said, look, this is kind of what we expect to see. We see these sort of declarations of a false dawn right before we get to your waterfall.
Well, I'm not a stock market investor, and I don't venture there with my opinion, but I personally do not believe the stock market is a good indicator. I know there's a wide variety of people who believe the stock market is the economy, but the fact of the matter is, at the last critical turning points, the stock market provided no warning, or only the barest of warnings, maybe of a few weeks, or very limited. Take the Great Depression of 1929. The recession, the Great Depression started in September. The stock market did not buckle until October of 29. The stock market, there may be a wealth effect, but it only applies to a very small percentage of our people. The vast majority of our people do not have a sufficient holding in the stock market to be a benefit to them. It is true that we can look at the screens and see whether it's red or green, but it doesn't mean that whether it's green or red, that is pointing to where the economy is heading. And we have to look to these economic indicators. And I think that there are a lot of people that would like to presume that red versus green is all I need to know. Well, no, that's not the way, and it has not worked out that way historically, and particularly so in the last 20 or 30 years. The stock market has not been a leading indicator. And to me, it's not an important, that's why I don't discuss it as an economic indicator.
All right, well, these are my words, not yours, but from what I hear you saying is the stock market really can be sort of the Wile E. Coyote at economic turning points, where it can walk in midair for a while after the economy has plunged, and deceiving people because it's still hovering there in midair. But eventually, it has to catch up to what the economy is doing.
I just don't think it's a good indicator. I would not be guided by it. That'd be my recommendation to your viewers.
All right. Well, let's begin to wrap this up. Thank you for giving us so much of your time, and this has been yet again just another fantastic discussion, Lacy.
My pleasure.
And we've really been light on charts, and I'm going to talk in a moment about our upcoming conference in the fall. But when you give your presentations, your keynotes at our conferences, and you walk through all the supporting data of the charts to what we're talking about here, like I said, it's literally like a graduate level presentation you offer. But you don't, and I understand why you don't talk much about stock market and make predictions about it and whatnot. But you do manage a bond fund. And so you have to pay a lot of attention to what's happening in the bond world. And I believe at Hoisington, you mostly specialize in treasuries.
We are only investors in treasuries.
Okay. So from your vantage point as a fund manager, where do you see treasury yields headed in the future?
We believe that the trend is downward. and we believe we have a long duration. And our long duration product does have a gain for this year. We had a loss last year, we're not happy with. But we believe, in spite of the mixed nature of the economy, we believe the critical forward elements, the ones that will ultimately determine, indicate that a long duration portfolio is warranted. Another thing that I might add, we haven't talked about it, is that we have a very highly inverted yield curve. The short rates are on top of the long. Well, by the way, when you have an inverted yield curve, and we've had it now for more than a year, an extremely long time, there were times in the last 4 to 6 weeks in which the spread between the 2-year and the 10-year was more positive than any time since the 1980s. Well, the inverted yield curve serves to reinforce the decline in money supply, bank credit, and the consequences of high real policy rate. Because not only the banks, but the non-bank entities, the shadow banks, they make a profit by borrowing short and lending long. They can't do that when the yield curve is inverted. But the other thing that investors should be aware of is that these inversions of the yield curve, particularly those that have been extreme, and this is now an extreme inversion, have typically preceded a very substantial reduction in long-term yields.
Is there a direct relationship between the extremity of the inversion and the extremity of the decline in yields? When they
you have to weigh all the factors. There's no single shot explanation, but it's present in very important periods of declining. In other words, the inverted yield curve, the longer and steeper the inversion is, it generally tends to coincide with significant declines, although there have been a few cases where the declines were only modest. But it hinges heavily on what are the initial conditions. And in this particular case, as I've cited to you before, I do not believe the initial conditions are favorably either domestically or globally.
Okay. And this is not individual investment advice for anybody watching this, but I'm just curious, from your tenure as a bond fund manager focusing on U.S. Treasuries, I would think that this may be a particularly attractive period to be investing in, or at least considering investing in Treasuries, for 2 reasons. One, they're finally paying you something again, right? So you're getting a nice return. It's actually a real return right now, which hasn't returned a real return in a long time. You know better than I on that. And you have, while you're waiting to see how this plays out, you're getting paid, but if yields actually come down and you're in long duration Treasuries right now, A, you're getting paid, and B, there's that optionality that you will realize as the price rises, as yields in the marketplace come down.
This is just a theoretical computation, not a promise of anything, but if the long Treasury yield in the 30-year would come down 100 basis points, then you would have a total return of 20% in addition to the coupon. So there you go.
Right. So sitting in a safe instrument and getting a coupon. So again, I don't really want to put words in your mouth, but is from the arc of your career investing in U.S. Treasuries, is this a year you're perhaps more excited to be investing in?
The only time there was an instance when I was more excited was in 1981. When I was at the Fidelity Bank in Philadelphia, and we were able to purchase the long Treasuries close to 15%.
Yeah. And then you had a wonderful tailwind behind you for the next 40 years.
We did.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, Lacy, I can't thank you. We've gone way over time. Thank you. I know we're going to get a lot of strong support in the comments for this. So, well, look, in wrapping up, I just want to let folks know about 2 things. One is that, again, a reminder that you will be the keynote speaker at Wealthion's upcoming conference in October. It's Saturday, November 21st, if I'm remembering the date right. Secondly, as I said earlier,